Hi, I'm Dr Ursula Hackett, author of Brilliant Essays, your practical guide for university essay writing success. Welcome to my special video series on dissertation writing. Let's talk about picking your dissertation question. Obviously, you need to love your dissertation topic. This is a huge piece of research, far longer than an ordinary essay, so you'll be with it for a long time. You need motivation to get it done. So start with the courses and readings that interested you the most during your degree. Pick out your favourite research articles in your area of interest, and for each article, identify the research question and the methods the authors used. For instance, Professor X surveys female campaign operatives to help understand why women are underrepresented in politics. Professor Y uses content analysis and ordinary least squares regression to explain why certain constitutional provisions are stronger than others. Professor Z uses archival research to conduct an etymological inquiry into the concept of spatial compression. The annual review journals are a wonderful resource here. They're available at annualreviews.org, and they synthesize cutting-edge developments in disciplines from anthropology to economics to political science. They give you an overview of recent work, and they explicitly identify areas where research remains to be done, unanswered questions, and new directions. I'd recommend reading an annual review article in your area to see if it sparks off some ideas for your own dissertation. When starting out with your dissertation, it's helpful to think in terms of puzzles. The puzzle's not the same thing as the research question, it's the motivation for it. It tells your readers why you're asking the question and what you'll contribute to real academic debates. The puzzle could arise from a dispute in the scholarly literature, or a gap in our understanding, or two empirical findings that seem to contradict each other, or a gap between what we expect to see based on our theories and what we actually observe in reality. For instance, you might spot a gap in the literature on social activism. We don't know very much about whether public marches from LGBTQ groups actually increase social awareness and tolerance. So you could pose the question, do public marches really make a difference to societal attitudes? Or you might see a dispute about the gender gap in political engagement. Some scholars emphasise material resources, others credit cultural determinants. And you could have a go at adjudicating that dispute by asking, how does the gender gap in political engagement arise? You might observe that existing scholarship about nature in the city downplays the connections between culture and environment. Your observations about the problems of the literature might inspire you to ask the question, why did nature become so important to the cityscape in 18th century Europe? I strongly recommend writing out possible puzzles longhand in full sentences so that you can make them crystal clear in your dissertation. Better still, have a go at explaining your puzzle out loud, just by yourself or to a supportive friend. If you try to construct them only in your head, you might find that later on, when you're trying to recall them, you're unable to do more than gesture towards some general, vague theme or topic. Your puzzle isn't the theme of social awareness and tolerance, or the gender gap in politics, or the topic of nature in the city. It's, hang on, what do we actually know about the effect of LGBT marches on public awareness? Not much. It's, here's a puzzler. Women and men have different political priorities. Is that something to do with patriarchal cultural norms, or different levels of wealth, or what? It's, this literature on urban history doesn't have nearly enough to say about the connections between culture and environment. Let's take a fresh look. When crafting your dissertation question, you want to find the sweet spot between vague and general on the one hand and ultra-narrow on the other. If it's too general, then your readers may not even know what you're asserting, and you won't be able to answer your question convincingly. If it's too narrow, then your reader will be left wondering, so what? Who cares? The best research tells us something new and interesting about an important area of study. So the precise Goldilocks formula, not too general, not too narrow, will depend on your discipline. But let's look at a few examples. These sorts of questions are too vague and general. What is thought? Where does religious hatred come from? How do politicians campaign? Remember, you only have the length of a dissertation, not a book or 10. These questions would be a lifetime's work. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You can refine these questions by making them more specific and circumscribing the domain of reference. Where do scholars disagree about the notion of thought? Which sorts of religious hatred are you thinking about? Directed against whom? What kinds of campaign interest you the most? On the other hand, these sorts of questions are probably too narrow. Are the observable properties of XYZ water in Putnam's twin Earth thought experiment completely identical to that of H2O water, or just very similar? When did Mormon pioneers found the territory of Idaho's first incorporated town, Franklin? How many leaflets were distributed in the May 2019 local elections in Wolverhampton, and what was the electoral result in that constituency? These questions could become interesting if you could show what your answer might tell us about mental representation, religious history, or political campaigning. What are the twin Earth experiment's strengths and weaknesses? Why are you interested in the Church of Latter-day Saints? What role do leaflets play in modern campaigns? You need to give us the bigger picture so that we know why we should care about your question. A Goldilocks approach, not too vague, not too narrow, might be something like, does the twin Earth experiment succeed in proving that mental content is broad? What factors explain variance in Americans' attitudes towards religious outgroups, such as Muslims and Mormons? Are partisan get-out-the-vote efforts more successful than non-partisan ones in British local elections? You want to pick a question that's just about right. Not so vague and general that it would take a lifetime to do the subject justice. I don't want to sit down to an undergraduate dissertation entitled History of War. But also not so ultra-specific that you lose sight of the bigger picture. For example, you'd need to be clear what your examination of the Japanese Soga Mononobe conflict of 552 AD can tell us about clan influence and the rise of Buddhism. So, top tips in brief. Start the process of picking your dissertation question with your favourite research articles and draw upon annual reviews. Nail your puzzle down by writing it out longhand and explaining it to a friend. Pitch your question at the Goldilocks middle, not too general, not too narrow. And remember to take advice from your supervisor. They're your best resource as you craft your dissertation question. Good luck!